which is, again, why, going back to where I started, why a debt crisis is different economically and politically than a normal recession. So let me develop that. Again, debt crisis does not look, some of you will be familiar with this book by my colleague, actually my colleagues now, because Carmen Reinhardt has joined us, Ken Rogoff and Carmen Reinhardt, called This Time is Different, the message of which is that it's never different. The subtitle is 8 Centuries of Financial Folly, and they look at hundreds of experiences of debt crises throughout the ages, starting in the 11th and 12th century, and show that there are very, very common patterns. It's a statistical study, it's not really analytical, it just shows these relationships. One of the relationships that it shows, which has gotten a lot of press attention, is that while recovery from a typical cyclical recession takes 3 to 9 months in their sample, the recovery from a debt crisis takes 5 to 7 years. So debt crises are different. They're different economically and they're different politically. So how economic? Why are debt crises different economically? They're different economically because they saddle the country in question with a massive debt burden, with a debt overhang. And this can be thought of from the standpoint of either the creditors or the debtors. From the standpoint of creditors, you've got, let's just stick with the US for now. You've got American financial institutions with trillions of dollars worth of outstanding loans, some of which they know to be bad, and much of which they think might be bad. So given the concern about their balance sheet, American financial institutions have very little incentive to do new lending, and certainly no incentive to do risky new lending. What they're doing instead is pulling in their horns. They're trying to purge their balance sheet of the debts that either are bad or they think might be bad, and only take on the highest quality debts. So financial institutions, for all intents and purposes, have stopped lending on net. They're shedding more of their assets than they're taking on, which of course, if financial institutions aren't lending, if the banking sector is not lending, it makes recovery very difficult. From the debtor's side, you have households that have been hit by a whole series of shocks. One shock may be that they got laid off, so their income is way down. Another shock may be, or is, that their retirement savings are now worth 40% less. Another shock is that their house is now worth 40% less. But their debts haven't changed in value because their debts are in nominal terms. So I'll give you an example, which is roughly speaking accurate with respect to numbers about the median American household. Median American household, middle of 2007, so a couple in their early 50s whose kids are out of the house already. They've got retirement savings of $250,000, and they've got a house that's worth $250,000, which is close to being paid off. And they look ahead 10, 15 years and they say, we're set for retirement because based on what we have in savings and a normal rate of return, and based on the house, we can sell the house, move into a condo, move to Florida or Arizona, and live off our retirement savings. So people have what we would think of as a target retirement earnings, and these folks have met it. They wake up a year later, and now their retirement savings are worth $150,000, not $250,000, and their house is worth $150,000, not $250,000. So they still have the same target retirement earnings, but they have 40% fewer assets with which to finance them. And so what do they have to do? They have to adjust their consumption and saving patterns. Now they have to save a lot more so that they can get back up to the savings that they want so that they can retire in 10 or 15 years. And we see that in the household sector. Household sector hit by these shocks stops spending and starts saving more to try to restore their own household balance sheets. So banks aren't lending, consumers aren't spending, and they won't start lending until they've purged their balance sheets, which will take 5 to 7 years. And the consumers won't start spending until they've restored their balance sheets, which again, will probably take 5 to 7 years. So economically, this debt overhang retards economic recovery.